Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cold War Military Heritage Lecture Series. This is from the Mazu Battlefield Cultural Landscape or Military Front Line Cultural Landscape, a potential World Heritage Site of Taiwan. This series is a cooperation of the Lianjiang Government Culture Department and the National Taipei University, Taiwan. Today, our guest is Dr. Norman Cramp, the Darwin Military Museum Director. Darwin Military Museum is a museum located in Darwin, North Territory, Australia. The museum is full of the military memory and the defense experience of Darwin. Today, Dr. Norman will give us an introduction of the establishment and the development of the Darwin Military Museum. So, Dr. Norman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody in Taiwan time. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I think we'll go through the presentation now. If you would like to move to the first slide, please. As we all know, the Pacific War commenced on the 7th of December. On the American side of the international date line, it was actually the 8th of December on the Australian side, when Japanese naval forces attacked the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The Japanese moved very quickly after breaking out into the Pacific, and Singapore fell to the Japanese on the 15th of February 1942, and Darwin was attacked for the first time on the 19th of February 1942. There were over 70 raids on Darwin that continued till November 1943. In all, there was about 20 months, I think, of raids, and as I say, over 70. During that period, the construction of two large gun emplacements here, 9.2-inch diameter barrel guns. The construction started in December 1941, but number one gun emplacement wasn't completed until May 1944, and the second gun emplacement, which is a part of the Darwin Military Museum, was never completed until August 1945. And bearing in mind, the Japanese raids finished in November 1943, so neither of the gun emplacements fired a shot in anger during the Second World War. Next slide, please. By war's end, there were approximately 200 buildings of various types at East Point, where the Darwin Military Museum is situated. The main buildings were the two 9.2-inch gun emplacements, the gun firing command post, and several other minor buildings. After the war, the East Point military project was largely abandoned by the Australian government. They saw no need for a large military presence. There was peace in the Pacific. Everybody was war weary. Due to the post-war housing shortage, bearing in mind a lot of the bomb-damaged housing stock in Darwin hadn't been repaired by 1945, and indeed a lot of it wasn't repaired until the 1960s. Many of the Darwin residents that had been compulsorily evacuated in 1941 and 42, when they moved back to Darwin, they moved into the abandoned military buildings and set up home and started to raise their families. Over the years, since the end of the Second World War, the vast majority of buildings at East Point have been destroyed by either cyclones, fires, vandalism, and or white ant activity. And the white ants in Darwin and in the Northern Territory are very aggressive, and they're amongst the largest white ants anywhere in Australia, I think. So in 2025, only 5 of the original buildings remain intact, and East Point is now a nature reserve under the control of the City of Darwin Council. Next slide, please. These photos show the very beginnings of the start of the military museum back in 1969. The larger photo on the right is the original wartime command post, and it is being opened. I think that gentleman opening the door was the then administrator of the Northern Territory. The photo on the left, on the top, shows the 6-inch guns that were out on East Point in 1942 when the Japanese raids first commenced. They were shore-to-ship guns. They weren't anti-aircraft guns, and they never fired a shot in anger either. The photo on the left at the bottom was taken in 2012 when the name of the museum was changed from the East Point Military Museum to the Darwin Military Museum. That is the entrance to the command post. That's the other side of the command post from the image on the right. That is no longer the entrance to the museum. Next slide, please. So the history of the museum is in 1968, the Royal Australian Artillery Association of the Northern Territory was formed and was granted a lease over the land at East Point that included the wartime command post and gun emplacement too. On 19th of August 1969, the RAAANT opened the East Point Military Museum, and it was the first museum in the Northern Territory, not the first military museum, but the first museum ever established in the Northern Territory. Since the opening in 1969, both the gun emplacements, although there is only one of them within the museum precinct, have been used for a variety of purposes, including concerts, plays, military and civilian functions like military dine-in evening, military parades and presentations and things like that. At this time, in 2025, all of the wartime buildings within the Darwin Military Museum precinct are used as display halls. We have done some upgrade work to those buildings in that we have lined them and we've air conditioned them so to better conserve and protect the artifacts that are on display. But the buildings themselves are still the same buildings as were constructed here during the wartime years. In 2012, the Northern Territory government opened the Defence of Darwin Experience, which is now the main and the largest building within the Darwin Military Museum. And it tells the story of what happened in Darwin on the 19th of February 1942. It tells nothing about the rest of the raids or the military activities in the Northern Territory. It is totally focused on the events of the 19th of February 1942. In 2024, the Royal Australian Artillery Association opened the Darwin Holocaust Memorial and Education Centre with funding from the Australian government. The Darwin Holocaust Memorial is the only such memorial in the Northern Territory. It is the only centre in any museum in the Northern Territory that tells the tragic story of the Holocaust in Europe leading up to and during the Second World War. The museum was established in 1969 on the back of volunteers, and in 2025 we still rely heavily on volunteers. They provide their time, their skills and their effort free of charge, and without them, it would be impossible and would have been impossible for us to develop the museum to the condition that it is today. Next slide, please. So on the left, you can see the map of the layout of the Darwin Military Museum precinct. The large building in the centre is the Defence of Darwin experience. On the left-hand side, that's captioned Building A. That is the actual museum, the interpretive centre for what happened on the 19th of February. Part B is the administration centre, the building where I'm situated and where I'm talking to you from today. The other buildings, C, D, E, G, H, are all exhibition halls. There's some of them are the original buildings from the Second World War. Building N and Building E, what we refer to as Sydney Williams huts, and they were constructed here at East Point during the Second World War. Gun emplacement number 2 is the structure designated Building J on the upper left-hand side. The image on the right of your screen, as you can see, is the entrance to the Darwin Holocaust Memorial and Education Centre. As I say, the Holocaust Memorial was opened in August of last year, and it has we've received a lot of very, very positive and congratulatory comments from visitors to the museum since then. And I say again, our thanks to the Australian government for the funding of the memorial. Next slide, please. As I said, the 4 buildings within the Military Museum that are heritage listed are the Command Post, Gun Emplacement 2, and the 2 Sydney Williams huts that were built here during the Second World War. All buildings and relics outside of the DMM precinct are also heritage listed, but they're not controlled by us. All of the buildings outside the DMM precinct are under the control, care and maintenance of the City of Darwin Council. Conservation and preservation of the heritage listed buildings in the Darwin Military Museum is carried out by the NT government in conjunction with the Royal Australian Artillery Association. I'm sad to say that very little conservation work to wartime structures located outside the Military Museum precinct is carried out by the City of Darwin Council. They have the responsibility for all of those buildings. They maintain the grounds, and they've recently, excuse me, they've recently upgraded the interpretive signage at East Point. But in terms of the buildings themselves, there is very little conservation or preservation work that I'm aware of. Having said all of that, the main issues regarding the conservation and the preservation of the buildings here are concrete spalling, or as we often refer to it, concrete cancer. Cyclone damage, because East Point, as you would understand, is right on the coast, right on the edge of the Arafura Sea, and so indeed Cyclone Tracy at Christmas 1974 first crossed the Australian mainland right here at East Point, probably about 500 metres away from where the museum is today. The flooding is a result of the topography of the ground, particularly the building, the gun emplacement under the control of the city council, and that the drainage system over there was damaged quite some time ago, and I'm not too sure if that has been repaired. Vandalism out here at East Point is not only a potential threat, it is a real threat. There are people that come here and vandalize things, and they attack the native animals out here, the wallabies, things like that. But it's by and large, I think the city council does its best to reduce the vandalism by regular security inspections. And here at the museum, we have boundary security fences. We have a broad closed-circuit television camera system in place, and all of the buildings, the doors and windows are alarmed, so that if anybody, any intruder, any illegal, unauthorised forced entry, the alarms go off. That system is monitored 24/7, 365. So it is vandalism. It is a problem, but more out in the nature reserve than actually here in the museum. Next slide, please. This is the Defence of Darwin Experience building that was opened in 2012. The concrete area in front of it is we refer to as the forecourt. When you come into the museum, the car park is behind us. When you walk in across the forecourt, the entrance to the museum is on the left-hand side. The entrance to the administration building where I am now is on the right-hand side. You see the 4 flags that we fly there every day, the protocol, according to the protocol. The Australian national flag is always flown at the extreme left. We fly the American flag here every day in honour of the American service personnel who lost their lives here, not only on the 19th of February 1942, but right through until 1944. The third flag from the left is the Northern Territory flag, and the flag on the extreme right is the Aboriginal Indigenous Australian flag. Those flags are flown, as I say, every day. And on the 11th of November, which is Remembrance Day in Australia, that is the anniversary of the end of the First World War, all 4 flags were flown at half-mast all day as a sign of commemoration, respect, and honour for all of the Australians, and indeed our allies that have fallen defending our country. Next slide, please. These are a few photos of some of the items that we have on display. Top left is one of the 6-inch guns that was installed and fully operational at East Point on the 19th of February 1942, although it never fired a shot in anger. Below that are just 3 of the various military, Second World War military vehicles on display. A 1942 Willys Jeep on the left. On the right is an Australian-made general carrier, or as we often refer to it as a Bren gun carrier. And at the rear is a 1942 Chevrolet Blitz general service truck. They all run, the engines run, they can all be moved, but we just maintain them in a mechanically operational mode, but we never drive them anywhere. The image on the right-hand side is the entrance to number 2 gun emplacement. That is where you, when you walk through there, you walk into the lower lower gallery of the gun emplacement, where the shells and that were lifted up to the gun deck, which is the turret on top of the entrance portal. The shells were lifted up by hydraulic or pneumatic hoist and loaded into the breech of the guns. All areas in the gun emplacement are now utilised as display areas. There is a below ground area to the right hand side of the portal, which was originally the power generation and hydraulic and pneumatic installations. We have now established a Vietnam War gallery in that area. The stack on the right hand side on the upper level is where the exhausts for the air intake and the exhaust for the 3 generator sets were during the Second World War. Those sets and all of the hydraulic and pneumatic equipment and the 9.2-inch guns were all sold off in the 1960s for scrap, and they were sold to a Japanese salvage company, which didn't impress a lot of people in Darwin or indeed around Australia, but I doubt a lot of people around Australia even knew about it. Next slide, please. A couple more of the displays. On the left-hand side is an Australian armoured personnel carrier. That particular APC, as we call them, saw service with the Australian Army in Vietnam during the war. The vehicle on the right-hand side is a 1950 Jeep that was utilised by the Australian Army in Korea as an ambulance. The armoured personnel carrier runs, the engine runs, and the transmission runs, but again, we never move it. We start the engine probably 3 or 4 times a year, but we never move them. The Jeep isn't operational. Major parts of the engine have been removed. We've been looking around for replacements for it. It is, from memory, I think it's an overhead valve Jeep engine that were phased in about 1947 or 48, and there are modern versions, but we're looking for parts for the original one, and they're really quite difficult to procure. Next slide, please, Mr. Chun. This is one of our exhibitions that we refer to as the civilian experience of war. We have established this display with rough and rusted corrugated iron walls, because a lot of the buildings in Darwin during the war, and particularly in February 1942, would have been like that. They were very basic, rudimentary. All of the items that you see there are from that wartime era, not necessarily all 1942, but definitely the wartime era. The uniform that you can see in the distance of the image on the left-hand side is an Australian Volunteer Defence Corps uniform. They were volunteers, men who were too old to enlist in the Australian military forces, and so they were enlisted into a Volunteer Defence Corps, very similar to what they refer to as Dad's Army in Britain. It was identical to Dad's Army. The other items around there, an old kerosene-fired refrigerator, a gramophone, number plates off some of the civilian workforce vehicles, and bits and pieces. So it's and the wreck of a 1939 motorcycle. Next slide, please, as we will be running out of time shortly, I think. So a few more slides. Besides telling the story of what happened here in Second World War, we commemorate the people that did serve, not only those that lost their lives, but those that did serve here. And we also recognise the importance and the efforts of animals during time, horses or dogs, pigeons, and even cats. I don't know if you know it, but cats served, thousands of cats served during the First World War on the Western Front. The statue is a typical cenotaph statue of an Australian soldier of the First World War. It is the only statue of that type anywhere in the Northern Territory, and it sits here. We had that statue sculptured about 12 or 13 years ago. And the vehicle on the right-hand side is a 1940s Ford wreck that was left on the side of the road here, sometime after the war. We went and recovered it, and what you see is a tree growing down through the wreck. It's really quite profound, actually. Next slide, please, and we're just about done, I think. As I said before, East Point is now a nature reserve, and so these are some of our native friends. There's a few of the wallabies. That grassed area is right across the road from the military museum. We see the wallabies here every day, every morning, every afternoon. They go and lay down and sleep during the heat of the day, but it's just beautiful to drive out here in the morning and see the birds and the wallabies all out having breakfast. The bird sitting on the fence is our pet peahen. The peacock lives next door at the equestrian club, but the peahen prefers to live here with us, and we look after her. She's very, very friendly. She's very used to human contact, and she walks in and around and through the visitors here. We'll even go and take food from them right from their hand. And I hope you can make out our pet snake. That is a python, and she is in the one of our water fountain ponds here, and she is cooling off, having a swim. And we don't see her very often, but we know that she's still here, and she's probably about 3 meters long. Lovely. I can't say that I love snakes, but she is really, she's big and healthy, and she's, I think, pretty friendly. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, the museum was established on the back of volunteers, and we still rely heavily on them today. The Royal Australian Artillery Association owns and manages the Military Museum. The Artillery Association receives no financial support from any government at any level, be that Commonwealth, Territory, or local government. And we have no corporate sponsors. Our only revenue stream is raised via admission fees, visitors coming to the museum, and special purpose grants that we get from the Commonwealth government and the Territory government for special projects like restoring a World War II vehicle or something like that. But we have to compete for that funding with every other entity in the Northern Territory or around Australia. The Royal Australian Artillery Association is a non-for-profit organisation, a charitable organisation, and as such, all surplus funds are channelled back into the museum to continue the development of it. In 2025, the museum has 2 part-time directors, me being one of them, 1 part-time administration officer, and a number of casual customer service officers who attend the admissions desk. The museum is open 7 days a week and only closed on 4 public holidays per year. I think that's about it, and I'm more than happy to take any questions if you like.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Norman, and it's a wonderful presentation and the introduction of the museum. Actually, of course, I have some interesting question, and the more will be about the one part is about the organization, and the others are, of course, the management of the museum. So, as one thing is you already said that actually the museum is owned by the association and have no grant from the government. So it's actually a totally volunteer based. So my first question is how do you find and organize these volunteers in your museum? And do you have some programs or some activities, especially for these volunteers, and what the volunteers can get from your museum, so they will be happy to work together with you?
Okay, well, in terms of the arrangement with the Northern Territory government, going back to 1968, the association was granted a lease of land on which to create the military museum. They weren't given the land; they were just given a lease over the land, and that lease is renewed, I think, every 12 years. The Northern Territory government built the Defence of Darwin experience on the land leased to the association, on the understanding that the association would manage that building, and that all revenue derived or received from entries would go to the association to fund the further development of the museum. Most of our volunteers are ex or former service personnel, except me. I've never served in the military, but I think most of the volunteers have either served in the military or they are retirees that worked in a similar industry. Like our collections officer was a senior librarian. She worked in the Northern Territory Library for about 30 years or something like that. So she volunteered to create our collection database and to maintain that. With regard to the programs and the projects for the volunteers, some volunteers come here and tell us what they want to do. Some of the volunteers, particularly the ex-service men, have an interest in firearms, and we have an extensive firearm collection here. By far the largest military firearm collection anywhere in the Northern Territory, and some would say even in Australia. So a lot of the ex-servicemen come here and say that they will help maintain those firearms because they're all in fully operational condition. They clean them, they make sure they're registered and all this. They clean out the display cases, but their focus is on the firearms. Then we have other volunteers who are retired motor mechanics or fitters and welders, and they come down and say, we'll volunteer we'll work on restoring some of the Second World War trucks, the vehicles like the Jeeps and all this sort of things. We have 2 of our volunteers here today, both of whom are qualified motor mechanics but retired, and they're working on the restoration of a World War II Matilda battle tank. That's their project. We don't ask them to do anything else than that. They tell us the materials that they need. We go and buy them, and they just work on that project. To date, they have restored a Vietnam-era Centurion battle tank, a Second World War Grant Grant Lee battle tank and have put the engines and the gearboxes and the transmission equipment into the hull of a Matilda, of a Second World War Matilda tank. And they just love doing that stuff. And so we just love having them here. They do a fantastic job for us. They're all happy to do that. We put on a couple of, we present a couple of functions per year where we invite the volunteers to come along, and we put on some drinks and some food, and we generally have a guest speaker to talk about some Northern Territory history. And of course, we always invite them to the museum's Christmas party, which is to be held on Saturday, the 6th of December this year. So it's not far away. So we also offer them some assistance if they need it, in terms of if there's anything that arises where they have a particular circumstance, we offer whatever assistance that we can. We try and look after them because they're definitely looking after us and the museum. It's an absolute credit to them. And by the way, I started here as a volunteer.
And
15 years ago. So I came here, even though I never served in the military, before I did I went back to university. I am a qualified fitter and machinist. I came here to lend my trade skills to fix things and make things here. By the end of my professional career, I had been in executive management positions for over 24 years. And so when the director here resigned, and he resigned really quite unexpectedly, they asked me to stop being a volunteer and sit in the director's chair, and I've been here now for nearly 12 years. So must be doing something right.
Yeah. So my next question is, since it's based on the volunteer based, so for the museum of the curation of the museum, the exhibition, how do you decide the topic of the exhibition? Because I saw it's quite a large range from the weapon to the military or wartime experience. So how do you decide the exhibition and the curation of the museum?
Okay, it's a good question. We developed many years ago a theme for the museum. When the museum was first opened in 1969, it focused on artillery, because the guys that created the museum were all former serving members in the Australian Army, but they were all attached to artillery regiments. They were artillerymen. They just like big guns. Over the years, as the museum started to develop, it was obviously necessary to develop a policy and a theme for how the museum was going to be developed. That theme is as it's developed itself, is the basis of it is the Australia's involvement in military conflict from the First World War to the present day. Originally, the scope of the museum, the theme, was really just focused on not even the Second World War. It was based around the period of the bombings of Darwin, February 42 to November 43. As committees changed and the association started to grow and develop and started to have surplus funds, it was and people's interest in the Northern Territory's military history increased. It was decided by the management committee all those years ago to broaden the scope of the theme of the museum. So it is now Australia's involvement in military conflict, First World War to the present day. And to cover that, we have on display a range of authentic uniforms from the First World War right up to Australian serving in Afghanistan, and everything in between. We have been fortunate enough to even get some authentic uniform pieces from Japan and from Germany. And so they are on display as well. And so if we're looking at acquiring another artifact or an asset, that suggestion, that recommendation goes to the Board of Management. We have a collection committee, but their financial delegation is limited, because we don't want 3 people saying we're going to go out and spend $250,000 without asking anybody else. So we have a committee, and that is made up of originally myself and 2 of the board members. I or anybody else, members of the association, can put forward a suggestion or a recommendation that we acquire a certain artifact, be it a battle tank or a truck or a car or whatever. The committee then looks at that recommendation to see, does it fit the theme? Do we have one of those? I mean, is it worth having one of those? What is the significance of it? Is it something that it's not on display anywhere else in the Northern Territory? And so we go through that kind of process, that kind of assessment, and then a recommendation is put from the committee to the Board of Management to say, we recommend that you purchase this on the basis that blah, blah, blah. And then the full Board of Management makes the final decision, and their decision is final until the proponent or the committee puts forward additional information to say, look, we just found out that not only is this truck a Second World War truck, but General Douglas MacArthur rode in it. Not that we're likely to do that, but that's just an example of how the Board of Management will reconsider things, but it has to be on realistic, additional information coming to light.
That's a very good management way on your exhibition, and that's very so that's a process is very good. So my next question is some management problem, like the vandalism. You say that it's really a problem, and most of, in my understanding, most of vandalism will come from the young generation. And can you tell me why they try to do vandalism on your property, and why they paint on your property, and how do you solve that if they really have the paint on your properties?
Well, in terms of the younger generation, I think it's fair to say that there has been a resurgence of interest in Australia's military history, and that has probably happened over the last decade or so. We often refer to the bombing of Darwin as one of Australia's best kept secrets. We don't teach that history in our schools here, not in the Northern Territory and not across Australia. We think that it's really important that we tell this story, and to do that, we engage with the schools here. We encourage the schools to bring their students, both primary, secondary, and college level students. We provide free of charge history talks on what happened here during the Second World War. We do some guided tours, but not not very many, because one of the areas we're lacking in at the minute is volunteer guides, because that role is really sort of ad hoc. You know, if we get notification we're going to have a group of, say, 50 people turn up, we might only get told that a day before. And so to get one of the volunteers to be here at that time is a bit difficult. So the interest in particularly in the Northern Territory's military history, the Northern Territory government has recently committed $3 million to promote military history tourism in the Northern Territory. And that is not only internally, but also externally, to tell people what happened here, and obviously to encourage tourism, military history tourism, as you would know. That's worth multi-billions of dollars around the world. Some parts of the world, like Hawaii, parts of France and Belgium, actually live, the majority of the population live on military history tourism. The Western Front in the First World War, Pearl Harbor, Second World War, you know, places like that. The majority of people that go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki go there for the Second World War history. If they want to go for the natural beauty of Japan, and I've been to Japan on three occasions, and it is beautiful, that's sort of to the north. The military history is in the south. And I've been to Taiwan, by the way. I visited your country about 8 years ago. Yeah, I loved it. It was really, people were really friendly, easy to get around, and just so. But I digress. Back to the question. One of the reasons that the Board of Management agreed to have the Holocaust Memorial here was, again, to tell a story that is really important, that people do not forget what happened. You know, at the end of our Remembrance Day and Anzac Day ceremonies, we say, lest we forget. We should never forget. And one way of making sure that people don't forget is to educate them, to make them aware of what happened, and to make them aware of why it happened and how it could have been stopped. So that's a big part of what the museum's all about. It's, as you know, being a charitable organisation, it's not for profit, so we're not here to make money. We are here to educate people of all ages, of all nationalities, because we think it's important that they realise just what this part of the world went through, like Taiwan went through in the Second World War, and after the Second World War, because if we don't teach that, people don't know it. The social memory is fading. There are a lot of people out there actively saying that some of these atrocities never happened, that Nanking never happened, that the Holocaust never happened, that the bombing of Darwin was only one raid, and it's not true and it's not correct. And our mission is to try and educate people, just to give them the facts, not to give them our view of what's right or wrong. I'm a professional historian now. I've gone from being a fitter and machinist to being a professional historian, and I don't put my views on things. I say, this is what happened. You make up your own mind. You form your own opinion. Our job is purely and simply to present you with the facts as we know them. We encourage the schools to bring their students here. Their admission fee, quite honestly, is almost nothing. It's negligible. And we do that because we want the students to come here. And one of the ways to achieve that is to make it so cheap and so attractive, we get them here. And then for 1 or 2 hours, we have them, as we say, captive audience. We can say, look at that piece of equipment. Look at that old truck, and compare it to the bus that you drove in here today, all air conditioned, beautiful suspension, lovely upholstered seats. Have a look at that truck and think what it would have been like for those soldiers going off to war in that. Make the comparison. See what they had to, what they contended with to keep us safe. I think it's a powerful message. We advertise broadly. Obviously, we have television advertising, radio advertising, printed media advertising. Even this, in a way, Mr. Chun, is advertising, because there will be people in Taiwan and other places that will all of a sudden know that the Darwin Military Museum is there and what it's there for, what it's trying to achieve. We must be doing something right, because we are now the second most visited tourist attraction in Darwin. The other one is fully owned and operated by the NT government, and it is free of charge admission. We've got no chance of beating that, none. So we are very, very proud of what we've achieved here. And as I said in the very first or the second slide, from humble beginnings to what we have today. And it's a credit to those hundreds upon hundreds of people that have come here and volunteered, and they've done it for the love of the history, for the love of the place. And we just can't thank them enough. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, yeah, actually you answered my next question, but so I will going through the last question I want to ask is about the management of these bunkers and the fortification. Like you told us, like the concrete spalling, the concrete cancer, and I think that's also happened in the 20th century military structures, because since then we use concrete, and these cancer actually are very difficult to solve. So what's your solution, and what's your experience on this, and for the restoration, what you can do?
Okay, well, you're quite right. You know, spalling, as we call it, it happens because of the moisture getting into the concrete and rusting the reinforcing bars. The bars, then the rust expands and it pushes the concrete away from the surface. Fortunately, we haven't seen any of that in the command post at this stage. But having said that, one of the things that we have done in conjunction with the government was to seal the roof and a portion of the upper walls of the command post to stop any stormwater intrusion coming into the building through the roof. It's like a poly material that you just paint on. You can't see anything. It's not like putting roofing material over it. That was done probably 14, 15 years ago, and the NT government and I inspect these buildings on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, I have some people from the NT government coming here at 1 o'clock today, and they'll have a look at the buildings and make their assessments and that. We had a limited amount of spalling on the gun emplacement itself, and the way that we treated that was after talking to specialists in this field. The bars that were rusting, the rust was neutralized. There were some small holes drilled in along the line of the reinforcing bars, and some rust inhibiting material was pumped into that, and so it allowed that to permeate through the concrete itself. Once that had pretty well set, The rusted areas of the exposed bar was removed. It was then coated with a particular product. I can't remember the name of it now, but it is a rust inhibitor. And then that area of the spoiling was rendered over, but it was rendered with a special bonding material that adheres it to the original concrete. And so for all intent and purposes, you can't see that there's even been any repair work. And the part that I'm talking about, that, remember the slide that I said was the entrance portal to the gun emplacement number 2? It was right above that entrance portal. And if you look at it now, you can't see that there was even any repairs. Now, the other side of that equation is in the gun emplacement across the road, number 1, because it has been allowed to flood. The lower rooms are flooded probably to a level of about 1 metre or 1.5 metres high in the lower rooms. When that, and the water just sat there for a long time. I mean, it took us a fair bit of pushing to get the city council to come and pump the water out. And so when that water's sitting there for that long, it starts to seep into the concrete. So there is, in some parts of that building over there, advanced spoiling. I have spoken, I'm a member of a Darwin City Council subcommittee that does with military history, and I have raised this on numerous occasions that something needs to be done about it. I don't know. I don't know why they're not doing something, but you know, I work more closely with the NT government because we have the lease agreement with them. Everything else out here at East Point belongs to the Darwin City Council. And so I can only raise these issues and say, look, you need to do something about that building. It's heritage listed. You know, if you do something now, it's not going to cost you all that much money. If you leave it for another 10 years, somebody's going to come along and say the concrete cancer is so bad, we're going to have to knock it down. And we don't want that to happen. So
that's a true and almost the same management problem in Taiwan in our cases. So it's a very good exchange experience on this. And so today's very thank you, Dr. Norman, to give us a speech and have a very good question and answer section. It's a very full of knowledge and experience. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Take care. We'll keep in touch.